be checking my notes as we go through, because these notes are also going to be provided for you. So each week you'll get the full lecture notes, as well as being able to listen to me talk for the whichever way you want to get the information. The book that we're going to be utilizing is called Heat and Cold as Therapy, and you can pick that up. And so, all right. So, to begin with, in this class, you'll be required to spend one day watching these pre-recorded lectures, and then be available for a discussion class online. You'll need to fulfill the readings for each video, and complete a weekly quiz and a short answer questions, as well as we get moving, perform some experiments. And the experiments are actually, you're going to be learning various techniques to utilizing heat and cold with respect to massage. So hydrotherapy itself has been a primary medical procedure for much of history. Even in the Ice Age hunter that they found in France in the glacier, when they looked at his equipment, they had his hunting equipment, he had his pouch, and his pouch was divided into two sections, and one section was food prep, but the other section were herbs. And when they looked at all the herbs, those were herbs that were healing herbs and things that would be mixed in with water to take in. So hydrotherapy consists of hot and cold, of using essential oils, of using all these other various oils. In fact, all ancient cultures have some form of hydrotherapy and healing procedures. So some of the more notable, speaking of essential oils, was Egypt. And they found these glass vials in the various Egyptian tombs that still have essential oils in them. And they were used as part of the embalming process, but also as part of the various rituals and for healing. Then you can move ahead and you can look at the Roman culture. Romans literally took the level of the bath to its peak, where they would have 3 pools in their homes. One was cold water, one was neutral, and one was warm. So the warm was called a caldarium, the neutral one was a tepidarium, and then the cold was frigidarium. And from those 3 baths, we get what we now know as our bathrooms, basically, because that was really one of the primary movements to have bathrooms in the home. The Romans were the first to do that. So as we're going forward, I'm going to give you some important dates and names that you're going to have to read for this week. The emergence of modern hydrotherapy really didn't start until the 1600s with John Fleur. He was 1649, 1734. So you can see the chart that's in at the end of your reading to see the overlaps and influence. But he was the first person in modern times to reconstitute, to look back at ancient history and reconstitute and codify certain forms of hydrotherapy. And he influenced a lot of people. He was most noted for the history of hot and cold published in England. So like I said, he was a scholar. He looked at Greek writings, he looked at Roman writings, and he distilled all this information into his book. Now, his influence brought the Han family into the picture, and the Hans were stationed in Austria, Germany area. They were a fairly large extended family, and what they developed and what they're known is that they were the ones that actually began to go in and take some of these Roman baths and create spas. We would call them spas today. What we call spas today has been called sanitariums in the past and various ones. But they were the ones that started to take these pools and take these areas and create them into areas of healing. So they created a string of these throughout Europe. Mostly in Germany, but they did start to spread out through Central Europe. Then one of the people, the next person I'm going to mention is Vincent Prisnitz. He was also in Germany, and he developed a basic cold treatment that were effective, very effective. And he studied this. He lived in a little town, and he was so well known that the town, he lived outside of town, that the town actually widened the road because there were so many people coming to him to get these cold treatments. So again, here we start to see it mostly in Europe, Central Europe, where this began to grow. Another person who is noted in this time period is Sebastian Knapp. He came a little after these people. He followed his work to cure himself. He had TB as a young child. He wanted to go into the monastery, but they wouldn't accept him because they said, you're going to be sick in a little bit. Well, he went and researched and studied these cold treatments, and he went ahead and he cured himself of the TB, put it in remission, and was accepted into the order. And then he was sent to this monastery outside this little village. I believe it was in Italy. And he got to know the local apothecary, which is what we would consider the druggist. So at that point in time, they collaborated, and Knipp was the person who began the whole essential oil movement in Europe. Began. It was there before, but right now it wasn't there. So he started that. Then over in America, at around the same time, we had one of the pioneers of American hydrotherapy was John Harvey Kellogg. And yes, he is the same person that developed Kellogg's cornflakes. He also had a sanitarium that he ran, which is not what we think of as a sanitarium today. It was a place where we went to heal. But with respect to the cornflakes, he was the first person to develop a way of taking grains and processing them so they would last over the winter. And he was really noted for this. It was a wonderful thing that he did. Helped a lot of poorer families. And it was good because at that point in time, it was what we would be called organic right now. It wasn't until his death, when he died and his brother took over. It was his brother that was trying to figure out what to do, because by then, more people had actually begun to create these cereals, and they were losing their, what we would call a market share today. So his brother figured out, well, what can we do? Well, everybody who takes these cereals puts sugar on it, so we'll just add sugar to the box. And he's the one that started to add the sugars and created the Kellogg cornflake empire that we know today in the shop. But it wasn't Sebastian. Sebastian was amazing. If you want to know more about Sebastian, there's a video that came out that's called Road to Wellsville, which is all about his sanitarium. So you can look that up. It's an old video, and it's probably still around somewhere. All right, next we have, if you read this, you'll get 90% of what you need. So the next person we're talking about is O.J. Carroll, and he's one of the best-known American hydrotherapists and naturopathic physicians. And he's still honored and studied today. I mean, some of his books are what they use up at the Naturopathic College. Bastyr and Dick were two of his contemporaries. For those of us in the Northwest, Bastyr is noted because he started a college up in Washington. It's still up there to this day, and Bastyr College is mostly centered around creating naturopaths and chiropractors and things like that. But Bastyr himself was placed so much emphasis and gave so much respect to massage therapy that to this day, last time I checked, you can go to Bastyr College, and if you're a massage therapist, there's a special scholarship for you that he set up way back when he first started the college. And that's for a massage therapist to move on from being a massage therapist to a naturopath or a chiropractor, something along those lines. All right, so what's hydrotherapy? This is all these names and people. And you have to understand, we term the word hydrotherapy, hydro meaning water, therapy meaning therapy, meaning water therapy. But it is really a thermal therapy. It's really all about changing the temperature of the body, externally, internally. And so it really should be called thermal therapy, but in ancient times, water was the easiest method to use to change the body's temperature. So, in other words, there were some people who would actually take their patients and set them in the creek and let the cold winter water run over them and bring them out. You know, that was one of the earlier important figures, and you can read about him. He was a farmer. He hurt himself, got run over by a big hay truck, farm cart, and he was in a lot of pain. He couldn't move, and he had his family members, his brothers, take him out to the field where there was a cold stream in winter. They built a giant bonfire, and their job was to put him in the creek, leave him there, go back, do some more farm work, come back out, bring him out quickly, put him beside the fire, and they did this day in and day out while they were working, and he was able to walk again. So, so when we talk about hydrotherapy, we're really talking mostly about thermal therapy. So how does it all work? If you take a look at your book, you're going to look at page 18, and you're going to, and that refers to the reactions on the body's physiological responses to stressors. Now, it's important to note that the body responds to the temperature difference, not the actual temperature. And by that, what I mean is, in fact, in Oregon right now, we're going through that phase of transition with our cold winters to our warm summers. And in wintertime, 60 degrees seemed really warm. And in a couple of days, our body will have adapted, and 60 degrees was going to start to feel cold. Okay? When I put ice on my body, it's the temperature difference that the body registers. Not the actual temperature so much of the ice, but that difference between what it is. So if I say run track, and I've just run a mile and I'm all hot and sweaty, and I apply that ice, the body's going to react more violently than if I have been relaxed in my chair, my whole metabolism is down, I'm not energetically active. I put that same ice cube on, the body's going to be less reactive to that stimulus. So when looking at the temperature regulation of the body, and that can be found on page 23, in its most broadest term, we'll come back to this in a moment. Let's take a look at the properties of water. The two most important are specific heat and thermal conductivity. And thermal conductivity means that's the way heat is transferred. Specific heat is the actual heat of anything, whether it's water, oil, whatever. Thermal conductivity has either conduction, convection, evaporation, radiant, or conversion. And they're pretty straightforward. Okay, conduction is direct contact, convection is the air moving around, evaporation is like what happens with your body. It's one of your body's mechanisms. We sweat, and that means that there's beads of liquid on our body, and then as that is evaporating in the air, it cools down because that evaporation is a matter where it's taking the temperature in, heat in. Radiant is again like what you would get from a steam heater, and then conversion is a direct conversion. And you're going to be reading all through this. So of these, as massage therapists, normally we only do conduction or radiant. And we do conduction by directly putting the hot or cold pack on the body. We'll do radiant, more importantly, with with actually heat. And there are such things as heat lamps. In fact, I have one behind me right here. By the way, this is my home office as I'm beginning to retire and I move back into the house. So those are the two that we generally use. With respect to ice and cold, it's very seldom that you'll throw somebody in a freezer, which would be sort of the convection piece. So what we use is always conduction with cold, whether you're putting them in an ice bath or whether you're applying the cold directly using ice or some other form of, they have alcohol balls that you put in the freezer and they come out super cold because the alcohol, of course, doesn't freeze at the same temperature as water. And you can use those to rub on the body. There are various things. And we'll be having you use a ice cup for your work. And that'll be explained when we get to ice. And that will be one of the things Dan's going to talk to you about. All right. So when we are applying external stimulus to change the body's temperature, we're working to create a specific effect. And to do this, we focus on creating either a local effect or a reflex effect. That's vasomotor, visceromotor, or glandular. There's different layers of the body that we're impacting. And as it applies, the local effect is when our intent is to work to create a specific, the body and stimulus is applied directly to a specific area where there's an issue. So if I have a spasm right here or a swollen muscle and I want to reduce the inflammation around that muscle, I would place the ice pack directly on it. And so that would be a very focused local effect. Now, to be fair, even when I'm doing other effects, there is going to be a local effect. Even when I'm doing the reflex work that we're going to do, there will be some local effect. So, reflex is when we apply a stimulus to a part of the body and create an effect in a non-local area. And there's a couple of ways that happens. For instance, we are bilateral human beings. And so out of my spine, the nerve runs to my left arm and to my right arm, and they both come out of the same spine. They similarly send messages back to that same spot of the spine and up the neck into my brain. When I put a stimulus on my left arm, if I did it right here, and left it there and continued that stimulus long enough, you would see a similar reaction on my right arm. And that's because as that left arm nerve comes through, it sends a message to the right nerve going out that says, this is happening over here. Check yourself. And it goes up into the brain sends down, this is what I want you to do, whether it's vasoconstriction or vasodilation of the capillaries. And when it sends it down to my left arm to do those processes, it also sends it down to the right arm, just to be sure that area is also going to be safe. So in some instances, what we will be having you do is, for instance, if I needed to take care of my left arm, but there was an open wound here where I couldn't apply direct applications, I could work on my opposite arm. And the reflex effect would help heal this side. Okay, so there's also reflex effects that you can do on the abdominal region, on various parts of the body that will go into the internal organs are affected. Again, this is just an introduction. I'm just running through this pretty quickly. It will make a lot more sense as you're reading through the book, but I want you to have this as the initial backup to make sure that you're looking at the right things. Okay, so systemic effects are when we focus on the entire body. And that would be if I had you as my client go into a hot tub or take a whirlpool. As we'll see a lot of athletes when they're injured, we'll see them in the whirlpool. And it'll either be a hot whirlpool or it'll be an ice bath. Literally, they're plunging themselves into ice. That creates a systemic effect. That changes the entire body, and it's something that's used also by doctors in this country, in all countries actually that have any sort of advance. For instance, if you were to be sent in to have open heart surgery or any surgery where they're going to have to keep you under for a very long time period, they will either encase your body in ice or run your blood through your body and through a chilling machine and back into your body, so they drop your temperature. Humans, like many animals, we actually have a hibernation trigger. Our metabolism drops, our oxygen needs drops, all of this drops down when we are in a cold environment. That's why a lot of times it's recorded where somebody has fallen through the ice, particularly in the Midwest with ice skating in the winters. And they've fallen through and they've gotten to them, they've called them out, but they've been underwater like, oh, they couldn't held their breath that long. They pull them out, they resuscitate them, and they're fine. And it's because the body just shut down, just like it went into hibernation. As we're going into our class, we're going to be starting with hot and then cold, and then we'll be looking at the ligaments, essential oils, various additives that we use in our process. We're going to start with hot because it's important that whenever you do a cold application or a hot application, that matter, the body needs to be brought back to neutral after you're done with the application. So I might put a hot pack on, and then I just don't move it away. I'll put a warming pack on there to bring the body back to its natural temperature. It's done what I needed to do. Some of the words and concepts to be aware of is derivation, retrostasis, direct effects of heat, reflex effects of heat, indications and contraindications of heat. And those are all in your book, and chapter 3 starts on page 62. That'll be what you'll be reading for the second week. And there is in your packet, as part of it, there you'll have my email. You're welcome to email me or Daniel, and we will answer your questions as quickly as possible. So I will be seeing you in a few days in the discussion class, and then we will learn a lot. All right, thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.